As we enter day 61 of our reporting, we find the nerves are fraying. Hello everyone, this is Chris Martinson here with your SARS-CoV-2, aka the honey badger virus update for March 24th, 2020. This is day 61. I'm calling this one the fraying because, as you're going to see, there's a lot of the national reserves in the United States which are being exposed to be pretty thin. There's a lot of people who are already tired of this. They have a short attention span, need it to move on, wish it wasn't here anymore, and they're just not ready for the marathon that this thing is going to be and starting to turn into. All right, remember, the disease progression all over the world is just case, cluster, cluster, boom, and off it goes. And we're seeing the boom stage for many, many countries out there right now. Checking in, we've got Italy here with 69,000 cases. Won't be that long with tacking on 5,000+ cases per day now before they catch up to China's total. Again, China's total, not too believable at this point in time. And however, I believe it somewhat. And China's talking about now releasing some of the lockdown procedures that they've had in Hubei. When you look at what they're actually doing there too, though, every person's going to have their own QR code, which has their whole history on it. So they will be able to track who's who and all of that. I mean, just compare that to the United States, where anybody can get on any plane and get off anywhere else, and who knows where they came from or who they talked to or any of that stuff. So I do believe China is using all sorts of tools that we should be considering elsewhere in the world to begin to really do the necessary steps in order to use technology, leverage technology, so that you can contact trace and know patient histories and things like that. Because that's really what's essential. I'll show you some data around how that actually works with full data. Otherwise, you're just flying blind. But noting here now that Italy has now passed the 0.1% mark with over 1.1 thousand cases per million of population. Switzerland also over that 0.1% mark. And USA way back here, but it's catching up. And this is because testing has now become available, more widely testing. And so the United States is the leader in this particular race you don't want to win, for most cases being recorded in a day out of this entire chart here. Italy is leading the way in deaths with 743, really grim toll right there. I've got some more data showing up in a little while from Italy, where we're finally figuring out, where I said, remember, in the gold standard for pandemics, step 4, all the way down there at the bottom, was that you have to treat people and then you got to collect the data, you got to share it. So we're going to share some of that Italian data today. Spain, still very much in the grips of this thing and having a really hard time with it as well. Germany, way up here now with 3,000 more cases. Wasn't that the same number as yesterday, or was that 22 yesterday? Very unbelievable. I don't know. That number's not right. Cannot be right. And as well, France hasn't logged in here yet, so we don't know where they're going to show up on this whole thing, but certainly it's going to be a big number there. So we're rapidly approaching the time, and it'll probably be another week or so, where these are all 4-digit numbers, and we may even start to see 5-digit numbers start to show up, just as I predicted. Because why? Well, that's just how exponentials work. So everything's still growing perfectly exponentially. Here's with one more day of data on here, and we've got that straight line right in there that's just bisecting through the centers of those circles right there. So still very much a exponential process out there. And I do believe that if we had more testing, we would actually just increase the slope of this line a little bit, because I think we're not catching everything. So right now, I do want to talk about how there's a big push out there, at least in my own country, the United States, but I know it's elsewhere too, to kind of ignore this. And I got a lot of feedback and emails from people, say in Switzerland and Sweden, saying this is how it is there too. And it's almost as if people don't want to, and particularly leaders, or I should say managers, because leaders lead. Managers just administrate. The managers of the countries don't really want to face this and don't know how to face it. So they're just trying to manage their way through it. So slow adapters are starting to have a really rough time of it. Here's one from Bill Mitchell here. He's got more than 500,000 followers here. And I think you can see his political leanings here. And I'm not sure if that's a correlated factor here or not. But here's what he wrote. He said, "I am so damn sick of these experts," in quotes, "throwing out numbers like 80% infection rates and millions of Americans killed by COVID-19. That simply will never happen. There is zero evidence that COVID-19 has that potential. It's pure fantasy they use to scare. Hey, Bill, if the facts alarm you, the problem really isn't with the facts. This is a really very dangerous and deranged sort of a point of view to hold right here. It's not backed up by the evidence. It doesn't comport at all with what we're seeing anywhere. It doesn't align with anything we have out here in reality. So, I don't know what to tell you about this, except I did find a picture of Bill modeling his adjustment reaction. There it is. And as you can see, it's moving kind of slowly. As well, we had another really kind of awful case of this, too. This is just grim in the United States, where Texas's Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick says grandparents are willing to die to save the economy for their grandkids. And that's exactly what he said. He said that what makes America great is that it's got this economy, and nobody wants to sacrifice the economy, so maybe grandparents would be willing to die. Just take one for the team so that their grandkids could, make minimum wage go to Walmart. I mean, I don't know what I sort of get it was just so clumsily said. I don't know what to do besides try and make some light of it, because it was just a really awful concept. Because, of course, we can do this we could do this in a reasonable way. Why? Because other countries are. There's a way to do this so that it's not like we're either going to throw Granny under the bus or we're going to save the economy. It's not like that. There is a balancing act, of course, that can be run here. But with this kind of manager out there running these very simplistic, very ignorant sort of views, it's going to take a long time to mount an appropriate national response. So, what would a solution look like? This is A. There's many, but this is A, not the solution. A solution. I like this one where I talked about it briefly the other day, where scientists did a mass test in this Italian town. And guess what? They halted the honey badger virus there, right? And so what they did in the small town of Vo in northern Italy, where the first coronavirus death occurred in the country. So this is the first death. So they jumped right up there. It's a small town, 3,300 inhabitants. And what they did was they tested everybody. They tested everybody in the town, including, asymptomatic people. So I guess, if you're going to test everybody, some of them by definition are not going to have symptoms. And they had tested the inhabitants twice. And they found out this study led to the discovery of the decisive role in the spread of coronavirus of asymptomatic people, something we've been talking about for a long time here, of course. And now we have data behind this. And this study, which began on March 6th, there were at least 90 infected in Vo. And for days now, there have been no new cases. And I think that's true as of the last time I checked. It was still true, although that I might have read something that was a day old. But here we are on March 24th. So as far as I know, still true. They say we were able to contain the outbreak here because we identified and eliminated the submerged infections and isolated them. Andrea Cristani, an infections expert at Imperial College of London, said that's what makes the difference. The research allowed for the identification of at least 6 asymptomatic people who tested positive for COVID-19. If these people had not been discovered, they would have probably unknowingly infected other inhabitants, very probably. Let's say almost certainly. The percentage of infected people, even if asymptomatic in the population, is very high, as they wrote here. The isolation of asymptomatics is essential to be able to control the spread of the virus and the severity of the disease. That's how you do it. That's a solution. That's what you do. You test everybody, and then you find the people who are asymptomatic, and you get them to self-quarantine, you track them, and you make sure that they're out of commission, that they're not spreading that. Data, people. This is not that hard. If you have this sort of data, then you know where your infection is, and you can contain it. Otherwise, it's just completely flying blind. We have no idea. We might as well be, casting runes and praying to gods for some sort of an answer, because this is how you contain something like this. It's really not that hard to understand. If you know where the disease is, you can do something about it. All right, here's a very different solution. When I talked about, the lack of appropriate attention spans for something in terms of really seeing something through and sticking out a 18-month to 2-year-long slog, which is what this is going to be, I believe. President Trump, egged on by a growing number of advisors and business leaders, believes the economy will crater absent a strong signal and wants to stagger the reopening of work nationwide. People who've spoken with him tell Axios. Here's the link for that again. We'll post the links. So yeah, I'm okay with staggering the reopening of work, and if it's especially if it's done in a clever sort of a way. And there's some jobs obviously that are critical; people have to do those. But again, with appropriate social distancing, and again with appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment, face masks, things like that, that should all be true. So if you want to talk about reopening work nationwide, you have to have a plan. Who? Is it the young? How do we isolate out the people with comorbidities and take care of them so that they're not part of this crew? And then how do you assure everybody has appropriate personal protection equipment and knows how to use it and is trained in all that? Behind the scenes, Trump has been hearing from lots of people in the business community and conservative media telling him the economy can't survive this shutdown much longer. No, the economy totally can survive. There's an economy in Leavenworth Supermax prison. It may not use dollars, but there will always be an economy. The economy actually we're talking about here is the U.S. banking system and all the debts that it has right now. That is a towering edifice, and it needs things to be constantly moving or else it's really threatening to not survive or collapse in this case. So this is really a bad scene right now for our banking system, our financial system, all that. And I get it that you need some of that. But in my grandfather's time, the financial system was about 4% of the economy, and now it's about 40%. So there's a lot of it. What they're really saying is the economy as we've configured it can't survive. Maybe that's not such a bad thing if parts of that get skinnier. That's how I see it. All right, the sources say that horrific, truly scary economic consequences were described to Trump. We have to get this going, Trump said during a dinnertime briefing that lasted nearly 2 hours. The faster we get it going, the more likely it is those stores, little businesses, big businesses, medium-sized businesses open up. And we'll get the economy going very fast. As soon as we say, let's go, and it's going to be pretty soon, it's going to be sooner than people would think. All right, I'm not getting a lot out of those quotes. They're not giving me much. Let's keep going on this thing. By the way, this is a solution. The solution is, well, let's just get back to work. I think this is going to end very badly for all sorts of obvious reasons. Namely, this disease is going to then fire back up and spread through our population, and it's going to swamp the hospital system. So nothing has been decided yet, but Trump has been persuaded, in line with his instincts, that the economy can't sustain this shutdown for much longer. The administration is discussing using different tiers to ease Americans back into normal life after the 15-day period that ends next Monday. People with underlying health issues or in the highest risk age range will likely be asked to stick with isolation, but others could be encouraged to get back to a more normal routine. So between the lines, the Axios journalist is writing, remember that Trump has no public health professionals in his circle of informal advisors. Those are not his go-to calls when he's in the residence late at night. They're all business or media folks. And remember, here's a media folk, right? So you got to be careful where you get your information from and who you're talking to, particularly when you've got a lot of sciencey things involved in this. And by the way, remember, this is the Balancing Act. If you go for any one of these, you will do it at the expense of the other ones. So you have to balance all three of these. And the concern, of course, is that if you don't do it well, you can swamp and crush your hospital system, leads to lots of unnecessary deaths. There are many people out there, I believe, in Trump's advisor circle who believe more fully that the economy is the most important thing. That's really what Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was saying was he fears the economy being harmed more than he fears death itself. So that's how strongly people are attached to the economy, and I get it to a certain extent, and I totally am sympathetic to the idea that you have to balance this out. But at the same time, you have to do it in a really intelligent way. And by the way, we're not doing anything intelligent here yet. We'll get to face masks in just a second. And there's a way to get your R0 below 1, which includes these tight containment, includes the isolation actions, but it really includes educating the public about good hygiene. It involves very routine, basic social distancing, and it involves the use of face masks. It's not rocket science. It could really not be all that much more simple to do this, but somehow it's proving to be just a little bit too much, and maybe we should just get back to work and see how that works out. Fingers crossed, hope for the best. By the way, the Get Back to Work movement, here we have Kaiser Permanente, or maybe Impermanente, I should say. They have a response for nurses who wear masks during the pandemic. Nurses Union put this piece out right here. And so on March 16th, nurses at Kaiser hospitals and clinics were told that lowered precautionary standards would be implemented and that N95 respirators would no longer be used to care for COVID-19 suspected and confirmed patients, except in a few procedural instances, probably intubation, things like that. Kaiser's reasons for downgrading protection followed the Centers for Disease Control's new claim that droplet in contact, not aerosolized transmission, was the manner by which the coronavirus is spread. What in the ever heck is going on here? Nurses here are fighting back. They say they know the science is incomplete regarding transmission and continue to wear their own personal N95 masks in order to feel safe and not transmit the disease to patients, coworkers, and families. Because, of course, you can be asymptomatic and you can spread it. I mean, we have all the data, right? This is about the asymptomatic spread and how important it is to catch those asymptomatic spreads. So if you're a caring nurse, you might think I might be one of those asymptomatic spreaders because, hey, I've been in contact with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patients. I want to wear my own masks. So they've been doing that. What has been Kaiser's response? Kaiser has told nurses that if they are seen wearing their personal N95 masks, they could be fired on the spot for insubordination. Wendy Fogg-Palmer sent this along. Fired on the spot. Oh my goodness. So yeah, let's get back to work. Let's do this. They say that they're going to try and do this in some sort of a sophisticated way, but this is so unsophisticated. I don't even have language. I don't even know what to do about it. I don't even know what to say. I mean, I actually, this isn't the only case. Check this one out. Tom Swire sent me this just earlier today. New York, corrections officers not allowed to wear masks. Correction officers in New York will not be allowed to wear or bring their own masks to work, according to the New York State Penitentiary System. Okay, what are these kindergarten rules? Hey, if you don't have a mask for everyone, you can't have a mask in class, right? Got to bring one for everyone. Is that it boggles the mind. It really does. It just baffles. It boggles the mind that these are the corporate responses. But the real reason for this, again, it couldn't be simpler. The real reason that this is happening is we don't have the masks. So instead of saying, listen, nurses, we don't have enough masks and we don't know how to supply you with them, and the government really screwed up and forgot to make a bunch of them, so here's the deal. We can't have you having them. And by the way, if you wear one and other people don't have one, then they're going to feel left out. Next thing you know, we're going to be facing some sort of a revolt or an insurrection, and so you can't have them, right? It's just such garbage. The idea that the United States is going to balance this out well here, this whole balancing act, when we can't even manage this part correctly. This is such simple stuff that failing at this means you're absolutely going to fail at this. No question about it. Very difficult. By the way, we can make masks by the millions. Tracy Ramsden said, Chris, there are hashtags for the mask making among us. I'm coordinating with my job laid off, but so is everyone. Sorry about that, Tracy. To advertise to see who's in need, and I have a cousin in a hospital I'm sending to. So here are the hashtags. Million Mask Challenge, hashtag Million Mask Mayday, Million Masks. All right, great job. And of course, it's possible, and these would be way better than nothing. Even if if Kaiser, instead of saying we're going to fire nurses who dare to wear a personal N95 mask, oh my God, Kaiser, just get out of here. You're just awful. Inhuman. That's awful. Then what Kaiser should be doing is putting out something saying, hey, we've coordinated with local people who know how to sew, and we are doing everything we can to get masks. And as soon as we get proper N95 masks, we are going to issue those in abundance. But until then, we're going to take advantage of the million masks and other things like this, which are happening all over the place. People want to help. It's not that complicated either. I mean, look, here are countries that wear masks. South Korea in red, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, right? See that? That's what that looks like. The countries that have no masks tend to be clustered up here, right? And that's just kind of, look at that gap. Look at that. That's just how it works. All right, so let's talk about how you can do this better again. So this headline's pretty misleading, but I had to run with it anyway. Out of Clean Technica here, Iceland is doing science And the headline reads 50% of people with COVID-19 not showing symptoms, 50% have very moderate cold symptoms. That's pretty encouraging. It's not actually kind of what's actually in the data here. So what is Iceland doing? They're doing random sample testing of their entire population. And statistically, once you get up to a certain percentage, just like exit polls, once you get a certain number of people responding, you then can get a very good cross-section understanding of what's happening in your culture. And so I believe they have a goal of testing everyone. But right now they have a total of 5,490 tests that have been conducted, and those have yielded 47 positive results, 0.86%. So that tells you the prevalence of the virus right now is fairly modest among the general population. And the government of Iceland reports a total of 409 cases have been identified since the first case on February 28th. One person has died. 6 individuals are hospitalized. 1 in intensive care. So that's what's been happening right now. And what they found so far is about a third of the cases can be traced to overseas travel, mostly to high-risk areas identified in the European Alps. More than a quarter of the cases have been traced to domestic transmission, so it's endemic, human to human, passing around. The rest, no idea, haven't been conclusively traced to a source, so don't know. Probably got it domestic. That's kind of would be my best guess there. So remember, the gold standard for a pandemic is first, you halt all inbound infections. So that's what I think they're going to find here. Well, they'll find it everywhere, but Iceland is noting about a third of their cases are coming in from overseas travel. So, hey, if you halt that, at least you've stopped that. And again, with something that is this virulent, even having one undetected case will very rapidly result in, a lot of cases all of a sudden. But 1B, if you can do these steps 1 and 1B, halt the inbound infections and then give face masks to everyone, you are almost most of the way there to really containing this thing, okay? And we know that because there's a couple of pieces of data. First, here's a modeling study that modeled the effectiveness of respiratory devices in reducing influenza outbreaks. So this is very similar to what we're going through here with the honey badger virus. Outbreaks of influenza represent an important health concern worldwide. In many cases, vaccines are only partially successful in reducing the infection rate, and respiratory protective devices are used as a complementary countermeasure. So they ran some studies and they asked some questions, and they said, well, hey, check this out. If you have an 80% compliance rate with face mask wearing, you essentially eliminate influenza outbreaks. Now, we might have to go a little higher because influenza has an R0 of 1.28. This beast has an R0 between 4 and 7 if it has no other NPIs, which this would be one of non-pharmaceutical interventions. If it has no other interventions or social distancing or anything like that, it's got a very high R0. But to get it down to the same R0 as influenza, it looks to me like having a compliance rate somewhere around here would be a huge, huge help. So that's a model. Hey, how's it work in the real world? Well, I presented this data a while ago, and this shows the average number of incidents of flu cases in Hong Kong on a weekly basis. So that would say right here they would have 2,500 new flu cases would be identified and show up in the system. Here it is across 2016, 17, 18, 19, and here we are in 2020. And so it went to 0. Look at that. Just cratered it out, whereas every other year it goes low, but it doesn't go to 0. And the second thing to notice is, see how this thing really begins to spike here? This is December, and it spikes up into the 1st of January, and see how that spikes, and then it comes all the way down, and it's not all the way to the bottom until 1, 2, 3, like 4 months in, so April sometime. Here, the flu went away by the end of February. It hasn't done that in any other year in this graph. So why did that happen? Well, it's because Hong Kong took COVID-19 very seriously. Right here is where they began, right here in January, very, very aggressive. Everybody wearing face masks, twice a day decontamination of public surfaces, workers running around and scrubbing hand railings, banisters, doorknobs, everything you can think of. So this shows this is what you do. It's not that hard. So this is what Hong Kong did. They halted all inbound infections. They closed their borders down, and then face masks for everybody, including, I should put 1C, which is like aggressive cleaning. If you do that, yay, you can win. All right. But now that we know face mask use is proven effective at stopping disease, but it's not being promoted for general use. It's not out there yet. Trump doesn't talk about it. A lot of countries don't talk about it. Kaiser Permanente, the New York prison system, are saying you can't even wear them. We're not even going to allow you to. Why? There's only one answer. That's because the government failed to stockpile face masks and had no plan for how to ramp up production, and then chose, and this was a choice, to shame the public into not buying masks instead of being honest. Or maybe you'll even get fired if you want to try and buck the system here and protect yourself. Just beyond bizarre that it's come to this. All right. A lot of people sent me this. So to move past that, by the way, face masks, they work, okay? A lot of people sent me this, which I very, very poorly worded headline here. Says CDC says coronavirus survived in Princess cruise ship cabins for up to 17 days after passengers left. I questioned that right away at my website at Peak Prosperity, saying, I bet what happened was they didn't prove that the viruses that were found in the cabins were actually still capable of infecting cells and replicating. What they did, I bet, was they had just detected some of the RNA from these viruses, which totally fine. You could have a dead virus on a surface, swab it, find its RNA, and get a positive off of that. And indeed, when I finally tracked down the study, and this comes, here it is right here in the CDC, we did find that that's exactly what happened. They said SARS-CoV-2 RNA was identified on a variety of surfaces and cabins of both symptomatic and asymptomatic infected passengers up to 17 days after cabins were vacated on the Diamond Princess, but before disinfection procedures had been conducted. All right, that doesn't say anything about whether this was still a live virus capable of, that had survived. It just says it's the RNA. The RNA, by the way, can survive thousands of years if it's stored properly. So that doesn't really tell us anything. But what was interesting as well from this, which I wanted to raise right here, and by the way, the reason I pulled this up is because it would be super concerning if this thing was living on surfaces for 17 days. That is not what this study said. Bad headline. That's not what this said. What it did say that was interesting too is that it demonstrated a high proportion, 46.5%, of asymptomatic infections at the time of testing. So we're starting to see about half asymptomatic. Now, do those people stay mild, stay asymptomatic, or is there just this ridiculously long, like slow cook phase where it takes a long time for that virus to come, express, take over a body, and then finally wear somebody down to the point that they show up as a serious case? Don't know yet. Available statistical models of the Diamond Princess outbreak suggest that nearly 18% of infected persons never developed symptoms. So that's good. That'll help us get to herd immunity faster. It would be great to study that 18% and find out what's their blood type, what genetic markers do they have, do they have lots of vitamin D in their blood, what are the variables that could help explain why somebody is infected but never develops symptoms. That would be a really good thing to know. All right, so I'm getting a lot of this too, and a lot of this I think is running around more quickly because of all the people who are already tired of this whole thing and want it to be over. I sympathize completely, and or they're just slow adjusters and they want data that confirms their worldview. But at any rate, this just came out today in the Financial Times. I found it to be highly irresponsible and really not good. It says here, coronavirus may have infected half of UK population. Oxford study. This is not some podunk place. Look at this language. New epidemiological model shows, that's a declarative word, doesn't say suggests or hints or anything, shows vast majority of people suffer little or no illness. That is a strong claim. Coming out of Oxford, big headline. What does it actually say? Let's see here. The new, because maybe if this is true, this is really good news. Let's check it out. The new coronavirus may have already infected far more people in the UK than scientists had previously estimated, perhaps as much as half the population, according to modeling, by researchers at the University of Oxford. So modeling. Sometimes models are good, sometimes they're not. If the results are confirmed, they imply that fewer than 1 in 1,000 of those infected with COVID-19 become ill enough to need hospital treatment. Said Sunetra Gupta, professor of theoretical epidemiology, who led the study. The vast majority develop very mild symptoms or none at all. Theoretical epidemiology. All right. So she said we need immediately to begin large-scale serological surveys, antibody testing to assess what stage of the epidemic we are in now. I totally agree. Let's get that data. That would be awesome because if it turns out a lot of people have been exposed, they have antibodies, they are now not infected or infective, and they are now immune, that'd be great. The modeling by Oxford's Evolutionary Ecology of Infectious Disease Group indicates COVID-19 reached the UK by mid-January at the latest. Like many emerging infections, it spread invisibly for more than a month before the first transmissions within the UK were officially recorded by the end of February. And so the research presents a very different view of the epidemic to the modeling at the Imperial College of London, which we've highlighted several times here, which has strongly influenced government policy. I am surprised that there's been such unqualified acceptance of the Imperial model. Ooh, Professor Gupta throws the gloves down. The gauntlet is on the ground. What say you, Imperial College of London? But let's, this is actually a fairly easy thing to debunk. I'm surprised that the Financial Times reporters weren't able to pick this one apart all on their own. It sounds impressive, right? I mean, how are you going to, debate a professor of theoretical epidemiology? I mean, that's as esoteric as it gets. Most people, I got nothing. But if it was true that we had so many people infected in the UK, it really ought to show up in the data. So let's go to some of the data and see what's happening. So this is in the BBC, which just came out today. So let's the current data. Currently, only people in the hospital are being routinely tested. So if you have symptoms, you're not sure if you have the virus, you may well not even be able to find out, even if you're working for the National Health Services. In total, 90,436 people in the UK had been tested for coronavirus as of 24 March. All right. So this is the population where you're going to get the highest hit rate off of, right? These are people that are showing up with symptoms. They had these same stringent tests like we had in the United States, where you had to have had some kind of a contact with a person who was a known COVID-19 patient, or you had to have had travel history or something like that, plus the symptoms, all these hoops you had to jump through. So out of these 90,000 tests, this should give you your highest hit rates. So if it turned out that half the population was already infected, you would have a pretty high hit rate. In fact, if half the population was already infected, I would suggest you ought to have detected about 45,000 positive cases. Well, they have 8,000 cases. So much for this theory. This doesn't even stand even like simple logical tests. And the second thing it doesn't stand up to is if we throw in the total coronavirus deaths in the United Kingdom, you've now got to explain how is this thing circulating since early January, infects half the population, but then only decides to start showing up in the deaths out here on March 14th, more or less. That's, again, just a big mystery that, you'd have to come up with a whole new mechanism and burn rate for, the infectious disease process inside the human body. So a lot of things have to be sort of set aside in order to believe this. But guess what? A lot of people are going to send me this, and a lot of people have sent me this saying, haha, you might be wrong, Chris. It looks like we're all almost to herd immunity already. But this is super easy to debunk. Very easy. If we have 90,000 tested, we ought to be seeing a big old number of cases, particularly if it's been circulating since early January. All right. But also very easy to do. You could do the serological test, or you can just, get out there and see if that's true. Hey, this was sent to me. India's by someone through Twitter. India's now doing chloroquine as a prophylactic for healthcare workers. So for all you healthcare workers out there, listen up. This could be something you may want to check into. Here is the full PDF. I would advise you to download it, take a look. India's given this a go. And so this comes from the National Task Force for COVID-19, constituted by the Indian Council of Medical Research, and recommends the use of hydroxychloroquine as prophylaxis of SARS-CoV-2 infection for high-risk populations. And so who are those people? Well, they're asymptomatic healthcare workers involved in the care of suspected or confirmed cases, as well asymptomatic household contacts of laboratory confirmed cases. So if somebody in your household has it, they're recommending to take chloroquine prophylactically. Again, let me stress this. If you're not a doctor listening to this and you think you're going to do this, you're not going to self-treat with this. You're going to consult with a doctor, because chloroquine has got a lot of very serious side effects, and it's very easy. It's got a very, it doesn't have a good safety profile. So 2x dose from what we would call a therapeutic dose is enough to really do some damage, and it does all kinds of damage, permanent retinal damage, cardiac arrhythmias, things like that. It has a number of side effects that have to be tracked, as well as got interactions with other drugs that you would want to go through the medical profession for. So with that cautionary stuff aside, what's interesting here is what they're doing. The recommendations here is they're placing healthcare workers under chemoprophylaxis, a fancy way of saying you're going to take the drug prophylactically as something to take before you've been exposed to COVID in order to prevent you from getting it. However, this should not instill a false sense of security. You still follow all things like washing hands, respiratory etiquettes, keeping minimum of, I would say, 2 meters. They're saying 1 meter. You're going to self-monitor their health and report anything if you become symptomatic, of course. And if high-risk contacts of a positive case are given chemoprophylaxis and then remain in home quarantine while under the prophylactic therapy and tracking your own symptoms and everything. And again, only on the prescription of a registered medical practitioner. Got to reinforce that here. And a lot of contraindications, too, that you want to be aware of. And if you do develop any symptoms, you should immediately seek medical treatment. So this is kind of cool. Healthcare workers are eligible. Again, the asymptomatic household contacts. The dose here, which is I just want to make sure we got this out there. 400 milligrams twice a day on day 1, so 800 milligrams total on day 1. Again, split, 1 in the morning, 1 at night. Followed by 400 milligrams once weekly for the next 7 weeks to be taken with meals. So that's the treatment protocol here that they're going to try. Can't wait to see what the data is that comes out of this. And for asymptomatic household contacts, that would be 400 milligrams twice a day on day 1, and then 400 milligram once weekly for 3 weeks to be taken with meals. Not for kids and not for people with all sorts of other contraindications here. As well, I got some really interesting Italian data. This came out. A lot of people noted this, and I want to just make sure that we have this. I wanted you to know what the comorbidities are. And so I translated all of this, and here's a table that showed out of 355 out of 203 deceased individuals, which is only a 17.7% sample out of the whole set of 2,003 people who died. But out of those 355, they noted that 117 of them had ischemic heart disease, and so that was a third of all of them had ischemic heart disease as an underlying comorbidity. Atrial fibrillation was in 24.5%, stroke in about 10%. Here's the biggie, arterial hypertension. So if you're hypertensive, that was showing up in a lot of people. 76% of them out of the people who died in the sample had arterial hypertension. Diabetes showing up in about a third of them. Dementia, it's there, but not that big. COPD, that's showing about 13%, but again, not nearly as strongly as diabetes, hypertension, and ischemic heart disease. And active cancer in the past 5 years was a fifth of all cases. Chronic liver disease, not a big deal, doesn't look like. And then chronic renal failure showing up, closing in on 1 out of 6. So at any rate, I just wanted you to see that because I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the number of people who died who had no pathologies whatsoever was just 3. So that's 0.8% out of this sample size right here. 89 or 25% had 1 pathology, 25% had 2 pathologies, and half had 3 or more pathologies. So if you've got 1, it's about the same as having 2, but if you have 3, that's pretty bad. So I thought that was pretty helpful. Continuing with this study, again, all links are down below. I thought this was very interesting stuff I pulled out and translated from that report. Respiratory failure was the most commonly observed complication in this sample at 97.2% of cases. Acute kidney damage in 27.8% of cases, followed by acute myocardial damage, so that's heart damage at 10.8%, and super infection, so that would be secondary bugs that came in your weakened state, took advantage. But seeing that heart damage, that confirms some of the other things we've been reading about in the kidney damage. What would be interesting is to track testicular damage as well. Because why? Because men are hit much more hard than women in this particular thing. They said here to date, as of 17 March, when the report was assembled, 17 of the positive patients have died under the age of 50. In particular, 5 of these were fewer than 40 years old and were all males, aged between 31 and 39, with serious pre-existing pathologies such as cardiovascular, renal, psychiatric pathologies, not sure what that refers to, diabetes, and obesity. So it would be interesting to see, because that ACE2 receptor, we know it's in the lung, we know it's in the kidney, we know it's in the testes, we know it's in the heart. So it's just interesting to see that this data is now tracking where the ACE2 receptors are. All right, moving on, the doing it wrong. This is the UK edition. So UK went into a modified lockdown. So what did they do about that? Well, they shut down some of their subways. And so what did that mean? It meant the remaining few that were running were just that much more cramped. And again, how many face masks? Do your little Where's Waldo search. I can't find a single one. This is just a nightmare to me. Vegetalis Facts here made a great point here. This is just off to the side, but I like this point. Isn't it weird that people living paycheck to paycheck are supposed to have months worth of savings for emergencies, while billion-dollar corporations are so poorly managed that they're on the brink of bankruptcy after a week of reduced profits? Yeah, that kind of sums it up right there, I think. All right, everybody, remember, you're going to want to plant a garden. This is for your own mental sanity, health, and also for extra food coming along. It's time to break out the old victory gardens along with what we could probably call the victory masks. So it's time, I think, to get everybody activated and involved as much as possible. The conclusions for today is that, first, various world managers, and they're not leaders, they're managers. There are leaders out there. Let me... I think New Zealand's got a great leader at this stage, and I think the state of New York has got a good governor and has got a leader, and there's a variety of states that I could mention that I think are there. So there are leaders, but various world managers, they're just lacking the patience and the mettle to see this through properly. It's not going to be over tomorrow. It's not going to be over next week. You're just going to have sort of Churchillian fortitude to make it through this one. The U.S. is very badly situated at the moment. It's going to get pretty bad. I was just watching the Senate debating, Democrats, Republicans, how much money are they going to throw out the door? Nobody in there is wearing a mask. They're all standing closer than 6 feet apart. I guess they have that super Senate immunity going for them or something. I don't know. But at any rate, when your managers at the top can't communicate even appropriate leadership in terms of modeling what to do and what not to do, you got a long way to go in that story. And of course, this is a fast-moving honey badger virus. All right, the slow and even non-adjusters are really stirring right now. They're making themselves heard. It's time to push back. I think it's perfectly okay to say dumb ideas are dumb, and we can just say that. Face masks, always, for everyone, full stop. What else needs to be said? Why aren't we doing this? It's the simplest thing ever. This is the simplest thing. If you don't want to crush the economy, then for goodness sake, get face masks to everybody and then make them wear them. Carrot and the stick, right? The carrot is you get to go back to work and we'll even throw some extra bucks your way. The stick is no face masks in public. Here's a huge fine and maybe you go to jail, right? Just make it happen. All right. I'll get off that little soapbox for a second. It just annoys me because it's so simple. All right. You're on your own, really, until these managers get a grip, and that might take a while. It didn't have to be this way. The face masks, it's such a simple thing that you can just look at just the face mask idea and understand that in the case of the United States, a country that spent $6 trillion fighting terrorists because they were the gravest threat to our entire existence, that was the story that was put forward, couldn't spare a few $100 million out of that, a fraction of a percent to stockpile masks. That was a colossal oversight. And because of that, it didn't have to be this way. If I'd been in charge all the way back early, mid-January, we would have had face masks for everybody. There would have been carrot and stick approaches. We would have been very, very actively socially promoting and rewarding people who are doing the best jobs of spreading that awareness and demonstrating and modeling all of that. And we would have had this thing pretty well under control at this point in time. But as it is now, if the United States releases the lift and puts a lot of people back to work without face masks, this thing's going to come roaring out of the gates again even faster than it actually already is. And again, it didn't have to be this way. Thank you for listening.
Hi folks, Adam Taggart here. Chris Martinson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.